This is the updated tier list for attackers in year 9. Let's get into it. So the first thing that I want to say is the situational category right here. This could be placed literally anywhere because people in the situational category in their situations could be better than people above here, or could be worse than people in here. It doesn't really matter. Imagine the situational category is in its own little tier list off to the side. Also, the operators in their categories specifically are not ordered, but with that out of the way, let's get straight into the tier list. So the best case scenario, an operator in the most balanced category would be the every round pick. Somebody like Ace. I think Ace is a perfectly balanced operator. Not too strong, not too weak, does his job, and you can play Ace every single round. So if you ever see me put somebody in this category, just know that I think that they are a perfectly balanced operator. Someone else who I kind of think is perfectly balanced right now would be Gridlock. I think Gridlock is in the best state that Gridlock has ever been in, maybe excluding like a few seasons ago whenever she had a bit more utility, but right now you can use her for site executes if you have a Monty on your team, or a Grim, which are pretty common right now, or a Ying maybe, but you can also use her for flank watch. You have EMPs or frag grenades or smoke grenades for the plant, so she's pretty cohesive with today's meta, which I like a lot. Next, let's go over Finka. I think Finka is a good every round pick. If we're looking at what makes a fragger good, let's talk about somebody like Buck, right? Buck is good because he has a good ability that lets him entry frag pretty easily, but he also has flash grenades and a good gun with good scopes on it. Finka has the exact same thing, a pretty good ability. Not too overpowered or too crazy, but it definitely gets the job done if you're trying to entry frag for sure. She has flashes for getting those kills, and then very good guns with good scopes to back it up. The LMG after the buff recently is pretty good as well, so I definitely recommend playing Finka if you think she's a bit underrated right now. Somebody else who I think is definitely underrated would be Grim, and I think Grim is a pretty good every round pick. You can play Grim every single round if you know what you're doing with him and be pretty efficient, but that's the thing. You have to know what you're doing with him. Grim is an operator that has a pretty high skill ceiling, meaning that if you don't know how to play him, you're not really going to get much value out of him, but if you do know how to play him, then you can actually abuse him pretty easily. Let's say that you need to go into a room and clear 5 different corners. Well, instead of clearing 5 of those corners for one person to be in a corner that you didn't clear, you could just Grimby off one side and then focus your crosshair to a different side. A pretty good operator in my opinion. He's being used a lot in Pro League right now in the Monty plant meta that's currently going on attack right now, so I think Grim is actually pretty good and is going to be utilized a lot more. Someone who's going to be used a lot less though would be Fuse. I think Fuse is situational. There's only like 1 or 2 spots that you can viably use Fuse where Fuse is like pretty good, but even then you could still pick better operators like Ram or like Buck. So I don't think Fuse is that good, especially in higher elo when people are just shooting your Fuse cluster charges the second you deploy him on the floor. I don't think he's that good, but I do think Fuse is good if you're trying to actually get a wall open and they're bandit tricking or cade tricking, because then you can Fuse one side and then you can EMP in Thermite the other side, or Ace it, whatever it may be. I actually find that Fuse is pretty good in that case, so he is situational and he does have a good gun, but I don't think he's a really every round pick like somebody like Ace or Finka or Buck would be. Let's talk about the cream of the crop though, some of the best operators in the game, which I think Dokkaebi is definitely a great operator. Operators that are broken, that are the best operators in the game, that probably need a nerf, are going to go in the nerf them category. Previously in my other tier list, this was the broken category, same exact concept, I just labeled it a different way, but if they nerfed Dokkaebi, nobody would complain. I think one of the issues with Dokkaebi is the fact that they kick you off of cameras whenever you're getting called, especially if you're dead, which I think is pretty dumb. So if they took that out, that might be good. If they took away her smokes, that could be cool too. Or if they made it to where phone call hacks only actually lasted a certain amount of time before they were able to work, like maybe 15 seconds or 20 seconds, right? That might make Dokkaebi not as good either, but if they nerfed Dokkaebi, no one would complain, which is why I had to put Dokkaebi in the S tier, the nerf them category, because Dokkaebi is just so strong right now. Somebody that is not at all strong, though, that definitely needs rework is Blackbeard. I have said this for many seasons now, probably a year. I think Osa should have been a Blackbeard rework. I've seen concepts of people with like drones that fly around with a shield on top of the drone. That could be cool too, but we have enough like droning operators, so I don't really know. They need to do something with Blackbeard though. It's been long enough. He's way too nerfed. He's not really that viable. There are people that are good with Blackbeard, but even then, it's still broken on the attacker side if you're good with Blackbeard too, so he just needs a rework. Now, I do want to preface by saying that operators in the rework category aren't honestly bad operators, except for Blackbeard, obviously. But they're just operators that definitely need a rework because they just don't really fit cohesively at all with anybody. It doesn't really mean that they're not useful. They just kind of need a rework. Operators in the buff them category, though, definitely need a buff. Like, they're definitely not good. One of those operators being Nook, or Nook, however you say it. When Nook had the silent step, I thought that was great. Now, they are actually going to buff Nook soon. At the time of this recording, they haven't actually yet, but I don't think it's going to be enough. Ubisoft addressed how bad Nook was because they said that people weren't playing her because they took away her frag grenades, but that's not why people stopped playing her. People stopped playing her because she didn't have her silent step, which was the one thing that made her very, very powerful. If they made it to where she didn't have an ACOG on her gun and she didn't have frag grenades, but she still had her silent step, I think a lot of people would be playing her a lot more than if they just gave her a buffed ability and frag grenades. So I think Nook needs a buff in that sense. But other than that, there's not really much I can say about the operator. Everybody knows how bad she is. Somebody else that you probably know that needs a buff in some way would be Sens, but I actually going to stick Sens in the rework category. Now, they did buff Sens in the sense that now Sens has 4 of their gadget instead of just 3, but I don't think that's what Sens needed. I think what Sens needs instead is a little HUD that shows you exactly where the Sens wall is going to go, so you can see exactly where it's going to deploy, how it's going to snake out, which can make it a lot easier for Sens players to do their gadget, because that's the one weakness right now that Sens has, is the fact that you can never predictably tell where her gadget's going to go. Now, I will say that gadget deployment being on as a setting is really cool, and it allows you to see a little bit more of where it's going to bounce, but not go after it bounces. One other thing I think they need to think about Sens is that Sens is way too counterable. Sens should do damage with the Sens walls, maybe even not be counterable by a Warden, shouldn't be explodable by impacts, I think, so there's just too many things that counter Sens that make Sens not viable. So I guess you don't really need to rework Sens, you just need to take away a few of their counters and make them a little bit stronger. So I think I'm actually going to put Sens in the buff them category for now, not in the rework, because they don't need a full overhaul of their gadget, they just need to be buffed in a few key ways, and they can actually be pretty viable, I think. Someone else who's way more viable is Zofia. Zofia is a good every round pick. You can play Zofia every round and be completely fine. Is she a 3 armor? Sure. But she has some pretty good weapons and some pretty good utility, always going to be reliable, which is why I think Zofia deserves an every round pick. Next, let's go over Amaru. I think Amaru needs a complete rework. Now, there are certain situations where Amaru can be good, but that doesn't actually mean that she doesn't need a rework. Still, yes, there are certain times where Amaru can be good. Like I said earlier, if you're in a 5-stack, if you're going up a hatch for a plant, if you're going in a window through a plant, like the consulate window, for example. But she still needs to be reworked, regardless of if she works. You can talk about, like, Tachanka, for example, before Tachanka got reworked. Tachanka needed a rework up until he got reworked, no matter how bad the rework is now. But you get the idea. Were there certain situations where Tachanka was useful still? Absolutely. But nobody would have denied that Tachanka needed a rework. It's the same exact thing for Amaru. Someone who does not need a rework at all, though, would be Ashe. I think Ashe is an every round pick that's pretty good. Now that Ashe actually counters Mira, and the R4C and the G36C have ACOGs now, I think Ashe is actually a viable operator to play. The utility is pretty useful, especially again because you can counter Mira, so I think Ashe is a pretty good operator right now. Next, let's talk about Blitz. I think Blitz is situational, and on that note, I also think Monty is situational. What situations can you use these operators in? Well, if you're good or not good at these operators. So if you're bad at Blitz and you're bad at Monty, that's the situation where you wouldn't use them. If you're a really good Monty player like me, like Kudos, or like other Monty players that are really good on YouTube, then sure, play Monty. You can probably get some good value out of him. There's a lot of champions that use Monty right now because people don't know how to counter him. If you're good at Blitz, like Glenny, like any of the Pro League players that use Blitz, you can get good with Blitz and play him viably. But until you're there, it's just not worth it to play. Unless you know that you're gonna be good with Blitz, you're giving comms, you're taking space, you're getting aggressive, you're being that shield, then you're just not gonna really do good with him. But if you know how to play them, you can get good. If you want guides for shields, by the way, let me know down in the comments. It's something that I'm more than willing to do because I have a lot of experience talking to shield players and also playing shields myself. So let me know if you want that. Someone else that I think is actually situational that you might think is not situational is Brava. Brava is only good on this situation where they're bringing utility that you can hack. If they have, like, let's say a lineup where it's like Castle, Mira, Smoke, Rook, and Legion, you can't hack any of those things. So Brava is pretty useless. You might as well just bring cutoff drones if you want to hack cameras to get those cameras, right? And then bring different utility that's more useful. But if they're bringing a Fenrir or a Malusi or a Capcan or observation blockers, ADSs, then Brava could be pretty useful, right? So pretty situational depending on the utility of the defender. Someone a lot less situational, though, in my book, would be Sledge. I think you could pick Sledge every round and be fine. Sledge is not as good as Sledge once used to be with the SMG-11, with being not a 3 armor, so Sledge isn't as good, but he definitely is still pretty viable. Someone else who I think is actually pretty viable right now is Deimos. I don't think Deimos is, like, broken category at all, but I also don't think Deimos needs a buff. I also don't think Deimos is an every round pick, though, so I personally think that Deimos is situational. The reason I think Deimos is situational is because there's certain bomb sites where you just can't really use a Deimos and find a lot of value. Let's take Basement of Oregon, for example. There's no vert you can do with Basement of Oregon. Every single place that you could enter to go into the basement is going to be contested by a bunch of angles that you have to go through in order to get to the person that you're tracking in the first place. Would he be good for like a roam clear for that site? Sure, but at that point, just play Jackal or play Dokkaebi, right? Or just run a shield into there and then like roam clear it yourself manually or drone it, right? Deimos is only good if there's a bunch of vert you can play on the site and there's a lot of different entrances that you can work without having a bunch of defender angles onto where you're entering. So I think map dependent and site dependent, Deimos is pretty situational, but other than that, I think Deimos is a pretty good operator. Not broken, but still pretty good. Someone else who's situational in my book would be Capitao. I think you can use Capitao every round. You could, honestly, but you're not going to find value out of Capitao every single round. You can really only use Capitao every single round in places where you know there's going to be a power position that you have to clear before you can get a plant down. Let's take Rafters on Clubhouse, for example. You have to clear Rafters on Clubhouse in order to plant in CC, so using Firebolts to clear them out of there is great. Let's take Half Wall on Border, for example. You have to clear Half Wall on Border in order to get the plant down. However, you don't need a Capitao for Archives if you're going to push that same exact site, because you don't need to clear out Archives to get the Archives plant down. You could just get a shield, get smokes, get a gridlock, get Grim, get Ying, whatever it may be, and get the plant down, even if they're behind that little Archive shelf, right? So it doesn't matter only on certain sites unless you need to clear people out, right? The smokes are useful, but they don't last as long as normal smokes would. So I think Capitao is just situational. Someone else situational is Flores for the exact same reason as Brava. You're only going to use a Flores if there's utility that they can counter. If they don't have an Azami, if they don't have a Fenrir, if they don't have deployable shields, then you're not going to use a Flores. If they have a castle, just bring breaching charges. Then you don't need to waste an entire operator on just one castle barricade. Like, it doesn't make sense, right? So you can only really use Flores if there's utility to counter for the same reason as Brava, which is why I think situational is the perfect category for Flores. If you want to put him in every single round, I could understand, honestly, because you can play him every single round. You're just not going to get value out of him every single round, if that makes sense. Next is Glaz. I think Glaz, in terms of how he is compared to how he used to be, I think Glaz is really good right now. But that doesn't mean that he's a good operator. I don't think Glaz needs a buff. I think they've done all they can in terms of buffing Glaz that they could do. They made him a 3-speed. They gave him a good secondary. They gave him frag grenades. He still has his smokes if you want to use those, right? But I think he still needs a rework, and I'll tell you why. The issue with Glaz is they're trying to make Glaz, and they've said this themselves, they're trying to make it to where Glaz is more of like a get in your face and help your team get the bomb down and actually sit and hold angles type of operator. Whereas Callie would be the person that's sitting in the back line and just like trying to watch people, kind of like ruins on coastline, right? But the issue is Callie's the person that's helping get the wall open. So Callie has to be up close, right? Whereas Glaz is only looking through smokes and holding long angles. So Glaz should be the one that's far back. So I think if they're going to rework Glaz, and I think Callie needs to be reworked too while we're at it, they need to make it to where they either switch the abilities on these two, or they switch the guns on these two, right? So that way they're actually being used as intended. That way it's cohesive that Glaz is a 3-speed if he has the ability to help his team get walls open, but he also doesn't have a 12 times magnification scope that's way too zoomed in for being with his team and being up close and personal, right? So if they switch the abilities to where Callie could see through smokes and Glaz could help get walls open, I think both of them would be reworked to perfection, because they would have their intended uses for what their gun is and how zoomed in it is and what speed they are and what utility they have as well. So until they do that, I think that they need to be reworked. And that might seem like a far cry from ever happening, but they did that with Oryx and Melusi. Melusi came out with a T5 SMG and Oryx came out with an MP5. Shortly after they released, they switched the two weapons, so now you see Oryx as a T5 and Melusi as an MP5. A lot of people didn't know that, but that is true. When they came out, they had switched weapons. So they could switch the utility pretty easily if they wanted to, I think. But that's, you know, a far cry from help. But I think they need to be reworked in some way, even if not in that way. Now, someone who's situational would be Hibana. I think you're really only going to use Hibana if you're getting hatches open, honestly. And you're only going to use Hibana if you already have, let's say, an Ace or a Thermite on the board. So, I mean, Hibana's situational. I think anybody that played the game for the past year or 2 years or month probably knows that. You're not going to use Hibana every single round, unfortunately. Next up is Yana. I think Yana is an every round pick. I think she's a little weaker now that she doesn't have flash grenades because she's an entry fragger, so using flash grenades after you use your clone is good because then you have information on them and then you can kill them without them seeing you. Now that she doesn't have that, she's more of a flex operator, which isn't really cohesive with her utility because her utility isn't really good for flex, it's good for entry, so I don't think she's as good, but you can still bring her every round and be fine. If you wanted to make a case for buffing Yana, I honestly wouldn't blame you, to be completely real, but I think her good guns and good scopes probably make up for the fact that she's not that good, so I'll put Yana in every single round. Someone who is definitely an every single round pick though would be Jackal. I don't know that honestly Jackal needs a nerf. I think just the concept of Jackal being an operator is why he's so banned. I don't think if they nerfed Jackal into oblivion that he would stop being banned, because the ability to get an exact ping on somebody just by scanning their feet is just a broken ability in and of itself. Which means you could stick him in the rework category, but he's not even that strong. He's not as strong as Dokkaebi. I'm sorry. If you disagree with me, I will go for hours telling you why Jackal is not as good as Dokkaebi. But I think for bigger maps, Jackal can be better than Dokkaebi because it's a little bit easier to roam clear. But even if the ability is broken and there's nothing you can do to nerf that, you can still nerf Jackal and make him a little bit less strong, right? Jackal doesn't need a secondary shotgun. Jackal doesn't need smoke grenades, right? Like, you can take those away and make Jackal just a little bit less versatile, but when I bring Jackal for bigger maps like Theme Park or like Bank, I know that not only am I going to be able to roam clear effectively, but I'm going to be able to make vert with my teammates if I need to, and I know that I'm going to be able to help my team get the bomb down with smokes. That's just way too versatile, which is the same exact issue that Dokkaebi has, which is why I think Jackal definitely needs a nerf and is in the nerf them category right here. Next, let's talk about Lion. I think you can play Lion every single round. Lion probably has one of the highest skill ceiling gadgets in the entire game with the lowest skill floor in the entire game. Pretty easy operator to get into, and the better you are at the game, the better you can be at Lion. Very good operator. You just kind of have to learn how to use him, but even then, if you just randomly scan 3 times throughout the round, you're going to get some value. You got a good gun, a good DMR if you want to run that instead. You have good secondary utility, so I think Lion is just a pretty good every round to pick overall. Next is IQ. IQ is situational for the same exact reason as Brava and Flores. You're only going to use an IQ if you see utility that you need in order to counter it, like an Echo or a Fenrir or a Valkyrie. You're only going to pick IQ if you see those utilities on the board. Next is Maverick. I think Maverick is also situational, purely for his utility. Like, you're never going to use a Maverick every single round if you're trying to use his utility every single round, because you never need a Maverick. Unless they're running Cade Turbo, you can just do what Maverick does, but with pocket EMP grenades, and it'd be much quicker. That's the issue with Maverick. He's just too slow, right? He's just way too slow at his job. So I had to put him in situational because there's only certain situations where you're going to use him, like going against a Cade or a Turbo, or sneaking in by yourself in a random barricade across the entire map, right? That's the only time you'd actually use Maverick. Someone else who I think is situational that a lot of people are going to disagree with me on is Nomad. I think Nomad, in all of the operators in Rainbow Six Siege, is the most overrated operator in the entire game, and I will explain why. You cannot use Nomad for flanks at all. You just can't do it. If you have a roamer that is good, the roamer has impact grenades, right? 9 times out of 10 roamers have impact grenades, but even that, they don't even need impact grenades, because every single place that you can put an air jab, the defender who's trying to flank you can just shoot the air jab before the air jab can see you. Now, on console, when people don't have that reaction time, the aim to be able to shoot the air jabs, I can understand maybe Nomad being more powerful for flanks. But you can't use Nomad for flanks. You actually can't, because you can just shoot the air jabs. It's so stupid. It has this loud ringing too, so you know it's there. So the only time that you can reliably use Nomad, where you know the Nomad's not going to get shot and be useless, is for runouts on maps like Cafe, where instead of having to use 2 claymores, you can use 1 air jab and then have 2 other windows that you can also put air jabs on, right? Or if they're in sets of 2, that's 4 other windows you can put air jabs on, right? Using Nomad for post-plant situations is pretty good too, but then you could just use Gridlock and be even better. Using Nomads when you're going against cheaters is also pretty good, because then they're stunned and you can kill them. But other than that, I don't think you can really use Nomad every single round. I don't think she's that good. The guns are cool, sure. The flashes are cool, sure. But you cannot use Nomad for flanks. You just can't. If you want me to make an entire video on why I have that opinion, let me know down in the comments, because you'd be surprised. Every single staircase or doorway that you think you can put an air jab on, a defender can just crouch, look up, and shoot the air jab before the air jab actually sees them. It's completely useless for flanks. Next up is Osa. I think Osa is a good every round pick. You can play Osa every round and have a lot of fun. EMP grenades for the wall, and once you get the wall open, you have a shield facing people, so the people can't even contest the wall once you have it open, which is really broken. Very cohesive with wall operators, but also using it to take space is very viable. Good guns as well. I think Osa is just a good operator all around. Next, let's go over Ram. I think Ram is situational. You're only going to play a Ram if you're going on a site that you can play above on. You can't really use Ram below unless you're on like a really weird map that you can like have a lineup for. So unless you're playing above a site, Ram is not that good. I think Ram you could use to rush, sure, but you could also use Amaru to rush. Does that mean Amaru is good? No, right? Ram does have flashes and smokes and great guns, which I love about Ram, but somebody else that has flashes, smokes, and good guns is Dokkaebi or Finka. Or Buck, I guess, without the smokes. So, like, there's definitely other options. Thermite has smokes, flashes, and good guns. So, like, you don't really need to be using Ram all the time. You can just use it on maps that you need to be above a site for verticality, if that makes sense. Speaking of Thermite, let's go over Thermite. I think Thermite, you could probably... I think Thermite's situational. What Thermite does, Ace can do better, I think, in most sites. Now, if they don't have a Bandit and they're playing Cade, I think Thermite's better because its charge explodes faster, and it's a lot harder for the Cade to K-trick. Whereas an Ace, yeah, an Ace, the initial explosion is faster than the Thermite, but when the Cade actually activates, the second portion of the Ace can't deploy because of how long it takes after the Ace nerf. Which means, yes, you'll have the wall open, but you can't actually go through the wall, which defeats the entire purpose. So I think if they're playing Cade and Turbo out, you could actually use Thermite pretty effectively. But other than that, I think Ace is just better for most solo queue ranked players. Next is Thatcher. I think Thatcher you could stick in every round or situational. Either or kind of makes sense. Like, you really only are going to use a Thatcher if you're helping an Ace or a Thermite get a wall open when you know they're bandit tricking or Cade tricking. That's a very, very specific type of thing. And also, a lot of sites don't even need a Thatcher. Like Coastline, you're never going to use a Thatcher. Stop banning Thatcher on Coastline, by the way. That annoys the fuck out of me. Stop doing that. You're never going to use it. Stop it. Anyways, like there's just certain maps you're not going to use a Thatcher. There's certain sites where you're not going to use a Thatcher. Even if they have banned operators, there's certain sites that you're not going to use a Thatcher, even if you needed a Thatcher if those banned operators weren't banned. So I think Thatcher is pretty situational. Next is Twitch. I think you can play Twitch every single round. Twitch has good guns, Twitch has smoke grenades, and an ability that is pretty good even if they don't have utility that you can destroy, because you can always get default cameras. You can always zap some sort of utility. There's always going to be something, at least one, like observation blockers, hell, even bulletproof cameras. Like, there's always going to be something. But just because she has those good guns and smokes, I want to put her in every round. You could honestly stick her in situational for the same reason that I put Flores and Brava in situational. Because you're not really going to use her utility unless you're going against utility that you need to use it for. But most people don't play Twitch for the utility like they play Brava or Flores for the utility, right? So I think Twitch you could put in every round. If you want to stick her in situational just for the integrity of the tier list, because I put Flores and Brava in situational, then that makes sense. Next up is Ying. I think Ying, this is going to be a hot take. I think Ying probably needs a nerf. I think Ying is absolutely broken right now. Like, just absolutely broken. If they took away one Candela from Ying, I don't know that anyone would complain. I still think Ying would be absolutely powerful, which is why I think Ying needs a nerf. I don't think Ying is quite on the caliber of Dokkaebi or Jackal, but I do think that she's better than, like, Gridlock or Grim or Ash or Sledge or Yana or Lion or even Osa. I think Ying is an amazing operator. You just have to learn how to play her. 2 smoke grenades, 4 Candelas with multiple flashes in each that you can pick how to charge, how to throw, an LMG with 80 rounds or hard-reaching charges. She's just too versatile, right? I think if they took away her smokes, or they took away her hard-reaching charges, or they made it to where she only had 3 Candelas, I think that'd be fine. I think she'd still be a great operator that most people played. Someone who does not need a nerf, though, at all, would be Zero. Zero is another very overrated operator. Zero is good in a team sense if people are watching your cameras, because Zero is a flank watch operator, right? So you need to be watching his cameras, but if you're solo queuing, no one's going to watch your cameras, even if they're dead. You can't trust them, so you have to manually be on your cameras yourself. And if you're okay with just being on your cameras a lot of the round, then that's fine. You can play Zero. And even if you're not using his cameras for flank watch and you're using him for sight, I think it's pretty good. It's just another lazy way of droning, kind of like Yana. He also has a good gun, a Gon 6, and hard breaching charges. So I do think Zero actually is a good solo queue operator, but he's not like broken. He's not S tier. People gas Zero so much, especially the console players. But I do think Zero is like a good every round pick if you wanted to play Zero every round. He's one of the best flank watch operators in the entire game, as long as they don't play Solus. But with it out of the way, that's it for this tier list. I do want to do one thing before you go, though, and that is compare it to my other tier list on my channel. So around 2 months ago, whenever the test server was out, the season hadn't actually come out yet, and I made a tier list on the season on what I thought would actually be like what the people were in each tier. So I wanted to compare my tier list from back then before the season came out to the tier list now to explain why I made some changes. So first of all, Deimos I thought was going to be the best operator they've released in years. Wasn't all that good. I think Lion also, after getting nerfed and comparing him to Dokkaebi and Jackal, I don't think it's broken. So that's why I moved those 2 operators. I still think these 3 are like just phenomenal. All of these operators needing a rework is exactly the same. The fact that they buffed LMGs and Finka has flashes put Finka up for me. A lot of Pro League players are starting to use Finka. Streamers are using Finka a lot. I think Finka's pretty good. Twitch being an okay, I want to actually change that because Twitch having a DMR is really good. I use Twitch whenever I see they have an Azami because DMRs do so much damage to Azami barricades. It takes like 6 bullets from your DMR to destroy one Azami barricade. It's absolutely crazy. You don't even need to use 1 mag of your DMR to destroy Azamis, right? So now you have a complete Azami counter. You have smokes and you have Twitch drones. So I think like Twitch is really good right now, at least for me, because it's one of the best Azami counters in the game. Not Confused being here makes sense completely. These operators being situational makes sense completely. None of these operators, I think I would change at all. So, I mean, yeah, I was pretty close, but I wasn't all there. But I wanted to make this tier list, like a second tier list for this season, because I made the other one so early before the season even come out that it wasn't really accurate. So I wanted to give y'all an actually like accurate tier list for the video. But with that out of the way, that is it for this video. Check out this next video. My name's Alka, and I'll see you on the next one. Later.